void of reality had access to this, that maybe at least in some instances it would quell some of those conspiracy theories.
The thing that is so disturbing to me, or one of the things that's so disturbing about your footage and pictures I've seen of you completely surrounded in that mob, people who hate you, not that they know you, just hate you for what you represent, is the personal nature of it. You're all alone in this crowd of people who are free to do, and we're seeing the video now, are free to do whatever they want to try to do to you and tase you in the back of the neck. I mean, it's reprehensible and just stunning. And I do think I understand you wanting people to see that footage.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it in my congressional testimony. I was not an impediment to Daniel Rodriguez or to Kyle Young or Albuquerque Head or Tyke. Those individuals that took it upon themselves to assault me that day, I wasn't preventing them from doing anything.
Those are the names of the people who assaulted you that day. Some of them.
Yes, some of them. And they did so maliciously. And again, I wasn't preventing them at that point from doing anything.
Michael Fanone, I really appreciate you being with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, the book, once again, is out tomorrow. It's called Hold the Line, The Insurrection and One Cop's Battle for America's Soul. It is a great read. Up next, why Georgia Republican Senate candidate Herschel Walker is receiving strong support from conservative Republicans, despite allegations that his behavior is diametrically opposed to what they say they stand for. Be right back.
$9 a month, and his wife Ann a $500,000 policy for only $21 a month. Go to some.
I think, unfortunately, what we have seen from Brian Kemp is a continuation of 12 years of racist behavior when it comes to voting rights. Let's be clear, this is the governor who purged 1.4 million voters, who disenfranchised and held hostage 50,000 voter registrations in 2018, who unfortunately in 2021, passed a leading law that has become the pattern across the country for voter suppression, SB 202, a law that makes it more difficult to apply for an absentee ballot, especially if you're a senior citizen or if you're a person of color who speaks English as a second language. He also authorized white supremacist groups like those that are challenging thousands of voters across the counties in the state of Georgia, and they can continue to do this up to Election Day. What happened in Cobb County happened in Gwinnett County, which is the most diverse county in the state. And what we have seen is that SB 202 under Brian Kemp is a continuation of a racially charged approach to achieve voter suppression, because the electorate in Georgia is quickly changing and he does not like the change. And what happened in Cobb County, luckily, those challenges were dismissed, but the reality is those challenges can continue because he's outsourced voter purging. And what is more concerning to me is that they are disproportionately people of color, disproportionately students, who may receive this ominous letter in the mail within days of the election saying your right to vote has been challenged. And for these voters, they will see this as a reason not to vote. That is how it becomes voter suppression. So whether they are successful or not in the challenges, Brian Kemp authorized unlimited challenges to voting rights in the state of Georgia, and that is unconscionable.
According to Politico today, referring to the midterms and midterm polling, quote, what clouds the picture is that the much discussed improvement for Democrats since the Dobbs decision, on abortion, also coincided with a 99-day drop in gas prices. Now gas prices are rising, and despite a good jobs report on Friday, the news is filled with gloomy headlines about the economy. So is the Dobbs effect fading as the economic storm clouds gather? That's what Politico asks. I'm wondering, do you think abortion, what are you seeing on the doorstep? Is it falling out of focus as a major issue this fall?
Not at all. It is such a clear issue for women in the state of Georgia. You have to remember, we have 82 counties without an OBGYN, 64 counties that do not have a general surgeon, 18 counties that do not have a family doctor, 9 counties without a doctor at all. We're about to lose a level 1 trauma center in the center of Atlanta, one of only 5 in the state, the 6th hospital to shut down under this governor. And under this governor, 1 in 5 women does not have access to health care. And now with the specter of forced pregnancy, because Brian Kemp is the governor of Georgia, this is a daily conversation because it is as much an economic issue as it is a healthcare issue. And Brian Kemp has proven time and again, he does not care about the women of Georgia. He does not care about their healthcare. He does not care about their economic situation. And under his extreme and dangerous policy, we've lost the All-Star game. We've lost access to Music Midtown, and we are going to lose the entertainment industry because he continues to put his own personal choices about our freedoms ahead of the needs of Georgians. And what we know is what we saw in Kansas, what we saw in New York, what we saw in Alaska, and what we're seeing right now in voter application submissions, 60% of which are coming from women. That is a high watermark we have never seen in Georgia. And I think it shows that women are very much concerned about the future of their lives, the concerns about their bodies and their right to health care and their right to make their own choices. And as the next governor of Georgia, I can repeal that law and protect the women of Georgia and the women of the South.
So sticking with this issue of abortion and Republican extremism and hypocrisy, there's this controversy surrounding Herschel Walker. It's caused Jeff Duncan, the lieutenant governor, to publicly disown Walker. But most Republicans in Georgia and nationwide have not done that. Top Republican senators are going to Georgia to campaign with him. Brian Kemp, as you mentioned earlier, the governor who you're running against, has not disowned Walker or unendorsed him. What do you make of the allegations against Herschel Walker? Is he a hypocrite if they're true? And should Brian Kemp be disowning Herschel Walker at this point?
Hypocrisy is a contagion in the Republican Party, and it seems to have its patient zero here in Georgia in Brian Kemp. If he believes, as he states, that there should not be a right to an abortion, then he should absolutely stand in that position. But that is not the issue here. He does not believe in a woman's right to choose. He does not believe in the freedom that we should enjoy, the freedom to vote, the freedom to control our bodies. He also opposes marriage equality. And we know that right now what we are facing in Georgia is the possibility of essentially a governor who's either in line and in lockstep with Clarence Thomas as he dismantles our freedom, or a governor who stands up to Clarence Thomas and stands up for Georgians. That's my intent, and I believe that in 29 days, that will be the reality.
And last question for you. We had Stuart Stevens, the former Republican strategist, on the show earlier. He said Democrats should be running on democracy. That's what they should be putting on the ballot. Is that the top issue for you in your run? Or is it abortion rights? Is it the economy? What is it?
Democracy undergirds every issue because the only way we get the freedom to control our bodies, the only way we get education, healthcare, housing, the only way we can force leaders to listen to us is through democracy. And that is why I will always stand up for voters and demand access. That is why I push back every time I hear people lauding Brian Kemp and Brad Ratzenberger. Refusing to deny the outcome of an election does not absolve you of your participation in denying access to elections. And that has been the raison d'etre for Brian Kemp for more than 12 years, and this year it has to end. And that is why I'm encouraging every Georgian to understand that democracy has to be defended, and we can do that on November 8th.
Stacey Abrams, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
It's going to be a fascinating race in Georgia, both in the Senate and for the governorship. But still ahead tonight, after another embarrassing setback, Russian President Vladimir Putin lashes out with airstrikes against Ukrainian civilians. The man you probably know as Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, also serves now as an ambassador for Ukraine's drone program. You can watch my interview with him on that issue next. Don't go away.
What an incredible experience. Jared Trainer, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, tell me, I don't feel very lucky, but
It's pretty cool. So Raw Egg Nationalist is maybe someone you haven't heard of, quite well known online, very smart, writes anonymously, often at the American Mind, certainly on Twitter. He is the leader of a movement that's looking outside the mainstream for ways to get healthy. We spoke to him for our new Tucker Carlson Originals documentary, The End of Men. Here's part of the conversation.
If the bro scientists had a spiritual leader, it would be a man who calls himself Raw Egg Nationalist. Here's his message.
The enemy today is what I like to call soy globalism. The globalist aim is to destroy nations and local communities, and they do this by isolating communities and sickening them through food, and also through so-called medicine, and all the dreadful chemicals we're exposed to on a daily basis. The globalists want you to be fat, sick, depressed, and isolated. The better to control you and to milk you for as much economic value as they can before they kill you. That's soy globalism in a nutshell. Own nothing, live in the pod, eat the soy. The best response to this is a strong politics of nationalism. The nation is only as strong as the individuals who make it up, and that's where raw eggs come in. Eggs are a superfood, packed with protein, fats, vitamins, minerals, and anabolic cholesterol. The absolute opposite of the disgusting rubbish that the globalists want you to eat. Eggs are cheap. You can't patent an egg. By making the individual strong, you make the nation strong.
We're honored to have Raw Egg Nationalist on the show now. He joins us anonymously. Raw Egg Nationalist, thanks so much for coming on. Why is it, so your position as articulated in the tape we just played is, it's better to be strong and healthy than to be weak and unhealthy. Why is that so threatening to the people in charge?
Well, thanks for having me, Tucker. I think it's threatening for a number of different reasons, and one of them, at least, is because illness is big business. Illness is huge business in the developed world, especially in the US. So whether we're talking about food, about the awful processed food that most people eat that's laced with high fructose corn syrup and canola oil, whether we're talking about the medical regime and the medical failure to address the root causes of people's physical and mental ailments, the prescriptive model of medicine, or whether we're talking about harmful chemicals that are featured in the documentary, which is it's worth remembering are essential to modern manufacturing processes. You can't make plastic without these horrible estrogenic chemicals that are wreaking havoc with men and women's endocrine systems. So there's that. Illness is big business.
But you would
The second
think
thing is...
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you. And the second thing is what?
I was just going to say that progressives are afraid of what fit, healthy, motivated men can do. Men are a revolutionary force, plain and simple. History tells that time and again. I mean, today is Columbus Day, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, there's that too, definitely.
And that does seem to be what triggers them. The idea that if men aren't passive, if they're not medicated, if they're not just sitting inside all day, then maybe there'll be a challenge to the hegemony of the people wrecking everything.
Exactly. I think the real power of this documentary, Tucker, is the fact that you're forcing them to face facts that they don't want to face. You're pointing to hard facts, to real trends that are substantiated by proper research, by real scientists. And they can't just sweep this away. They can't sweep it under the rug.
No, they can't. Right, nationalists, you're definitely one of the stars of this documentary. We're grateful for that and for coming on tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
The End of Men is the documentary. It's now on Fox Nation. So obviously you can't celebrate Columbus Day. It's Indigenous Peoples Day. No one asked Indigenous people what they think of that, but it doesn't matter. They have only one representative in the United States Congress right now, and that, of course, is Elizabeth Warren. She's next.
The government says at least 14 people are dead and dozens more are injured. The Russian missiles struck across the country, including the capital city of Kyiv and the western city of Lviv. The Kremlin says the strikes are retaliation for an explosion that destroyed a key bridge connecting Russia and annexed Crimea on Saturday. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said he spoke with President Biden after the attacks today, and that air defense, quote, is currently the #1 priority. That has been a primary focus of Ukraine's defense strategy for months, in fact. And Zelensky has been asking for help on that front from everyone, even from celebrities like Luke Skywalker himself, actor Mark Hamill, who just became an ambassador for Ukraine's drone program. And in his first American TV interview on my show on Sunday night, he told me what it was like getting that call from Zelensky and what he's being asked to do.
I was really surprised to be contacted by President Zelensky. I assume I didn't ask why. I mean, I think they saw my support for Ukraine on my Twitter feed, but it's I'm not used to being contacted by world leaders. I'm a court jester. I'm a non-essential worker. I do cartoon voices and TV and movies. So I was honored to be contacted by him, and basically what they were wanting me to do was become a so-called ambassador, which glorified word for representative of their army of drones, because drones define war outcomes. They're essential for Ukraine to protect their border, to protect their citizens, and
Yes.
that's what I hope people will do. Over 115 countries have donated to various causes, not just yes.
We know that the president wants these drones to kind of maintain ends. We know that Russian air dominance was this problem at the start of the war. We know that there's a very long border between Ukraine and Russia that needs monitoring. But are all these drones non-lethal drones, lethal drones, a mix of drones?
I think it's a mix. Obviously, the Russians have many more drones than the Ukraine does, and they are, used to bomb civilians and so forth. But the one thing I wanted to mention too, if you have, you can donate money, but if you have an actual drone, you could donate that. Or dronate that, as they say.
Mark, what attracted you to this role? Why did you want to do it? And why do you think Ukraine has captured the imagination and support of the American people like no other foreign conflict or country that I can think of in living memory?
Well, we've never seen a country unilaterally invaded. I mean, in my lifetime, I guess it goes back to World War II, but it's the classic, David versus Goliath. Everyone expected Ukraine to just immediately surrender to this invading force. And I think to see them fight back with such courage, it's been an inspiration to see.
Today's Republicans, though, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Matt Gaetzes, the Donald Trumps, they don't really share that view. They don't really want us to be funding or supporting Ukraine. They don't think Russia is that bad. Donald Trump, Mark, just said yesterday that Joe Biden almost forced Putin to invade Ukraine by taunting him with dumb rhetoric. That's Trump's words. What do you make of what is your view of Russia? What do you make of the GOP's view of Russia?
Well, someone asked me in an interview if the actors in Star Wars supported Ukraine. And I said, well, I haven't spoken to them personally, but who would support Russia? And then I thought, oh yeah, Fox News, OAN, Newsmax. It's really, really strange. I don't get it. But we live in the fact-based community. Unfortunately, when you have people that believe the election was stolen based on no evidence, you're entitled to your own facts and you're entitled to your own opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. And that's the thing that I think is that the former president is, the damage will last for years and years because he's convinced his supporters to believe that we don't have free and fair election, despite no evidence whatsoever. And that's going to last for a long time to come.
So you're clearly very political. That's how you and I found each other on Twitter with our political tweets.
Right.
Just yesterday, you mocked Herschel Walker in Georgia on Twitter, saying, even if he turns up to a debate with Raphael Warnock, Warnock will still be addressing an empty podium. Have you always been politically engaged, politically passionate?
Well, I have been, but I'm not publicly. In other words, I've always voted as I said. No one's ever asked for my help until Michael Dukakis asked me to go out on the campaign trail. It was in the last month or so, so he was in a downward spiral for sure. But what happened was that when I got on Twitter, I think your personality comes out and your likes and dislikes, because I'm not an activist, I'm not a pundit. But, I'm just an American citizen who has an opinion.
One last question I have to ask, Mark, before I let you go. It's a Star Wars question from a fanboy.
Yes.
What was it like to be back on screen as Luke Skywalker? Well, kind of back on screen, aided by CGI, in the TV series The Mandalorian on Disney Plus after all those years? I mean, I literally, like many, whooped out loud when you arrived in that fight scene in the season 2 finale.
Well, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni invited me over to watch some footage. They said they wanted my opinion. I thought, well, that's unusual. No one has done that before when it came to Star Wars, certainly not in the sequel. So I went over, they showed me the footage, and then they proposed this idea, which I was gobsmacked, as you British are fond of saying, because the de-aging process and the whole thing. I mean, I never thought I'd go back and play that part again.
We are sadly out of time, but I appreciate you joining me. Mark Hamill.
Thanks so much for having me, Maddie.
That is all in on this Monday night. May the force be with you too. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel. Congratulations on your podcast.
Thank you very much. I was just regretting, I used to keep a lightsaber at the desk here, and I don't know, I've misplaced it. I've moved around a lot, and so I cannot salute you with the way that you ought to with your Mark Hamill interview, but that was fantastic.
It was a great moment for me. I've interviewed a lot of people, but to interview Skywalker himself, what a lovely guy. Doing
excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. Appreciated. And thanks to home for joining us this hour. Really happy to have you here. So we are less than 30 days out now from the elections. We're going to be joined in just a moment by the man who is in charge of the Democratic Party's efforts to hold the United States Senate. And that is quite a job this year. The polling averages right now show that the prospects for both parties in the Senate are equal as of today. Literally, if what the polling says today ends up matching the vote on election day, it will be 50-50 in the Senate. So in terms of control of the Senate, control of the direction of the country, every race really matters. Every seat really matters. Every candidate really matters. It is just on a knife's edge. And I mean, just at a personal level, if you didn't know whether you're going to volunteer for a candidate yet this year, if you were going to volunteer to door knocker or do some get out the vote work, if you hadn't yet committed to just voting for sure yourself this year your vote really will matter. This is not one to skip out on. This election is going to be very tight and very, very interesting and very consequential. Again, if the polling bears out and election day looks anything like the polls say it's going to look today. Again, we'll be talking with the man in charge of the Democratic Party's efforts in the Senate in just a moment. Obviously, a super high stakes job, super difficult job. Still, though, who would you rather be? Would you rather be the Senate guy for the Democrats right now? Or would you rather be the Senate guy for the Republicans, who tomorrow has to go to the state of Georgia and say, yeah, hey, everybody vote for Herschel Walker. Because when you look at Herschel Walker, take it from me, we want you to know that's what Republicans stand for. And no, we will not be taking questions about the holding a gun to a woman's head thing, nor will we be taking questions about these secret children no one was allowed to know about while he's running on his supposed family values. Nor will we be taking any questions about any of the abortions, even though he wants all abortions banned. Nope, we will not be taking questions about the times he said he used to run 6 hospitals. And that he graduated from college in the top 1% of his class when he actually did not graduate from college at all. Nor will we be taking questions about his fantasies that he runs the country's largest upholstery business and also gigantic chicken businesses, which in fact he does not run. Nor will we be taking questions about the times he said he was a law enforcement officer or the time he claimed to be an FBI agent. No, he is not an FBI agent. He is not a police officer, even though he has said he was both. We will not be answering questions about those matters today, but do please vote for the man anyway. Because Republican Party values, I'm here to attest. I mean, your job may suck. I hope it doesn't. I hope you have a great job. But even if your job sucks, you're still not Rick Scott. I mean, imagine that was your job. Republican Senator Rick Scott is running the Senate campaigns this year for the Republicans. Tomorrow, he really is going to have to go do that in Georgia to try to save that Georgia Senate race for the Republican Party, where their candidate, unfortunately for them, is Herschel Walker. Senator Rick Scott's Democratic counterpart really does not have candidate problems like that to contend with, even though, it's still a tough row to hoe. The Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, is run by Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. He's the counterpart to Senator Rick Scott on the Republican side this year. Senator Gary Peters of Michigan is going to be our guest here live in just a few minutes. Very much looking forward to that conversation. But it's tempting in years like this to look at some of these just astonishing candidates and think, God, it can't have ever been any worse than this. How did it get so bad? It's been bad in the past. It's never been this bad. I mean, this Herschel Walker thing in Georgia is Like, what is going to come out next? And then there's, the Republican candidate for Senate in Arizona, who says his vote for the most underrated thinker is the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. And this is not a circumstance in which the candidate was given a test where it was multiple choice. The only possible answers were like, Satan, Pol Pot, Idi Amin, Stalin, or the Unabomber. It's not like he had to choose the best among bad. It was just an open question. Who do you like? And he just volunteered that the one he likes is the Unabomber.
Subversive thinker that's underrated?
Yeah.
I'll probably get in trouble for saying this. I'd say, how about Theodore Kaczynski?
Good one. Actually, yeah.
Probably not great to be talking about Unabomber while campaigning.
Oh, I don't know. And that wasn't like a youthful indiscretion. That was this year while he's running. And now he's the Republican nominee for Senate in the great state of Arizona, everyone. If you didn't like that the Unabomber wasn't able to get more of what he wanted, just elect Blake Masters and see. I mean, so it's tempting when you've got Herschel Walker in Georgia, when you've got that guy in Arizona, when you've got this snake oil quack supplement salesman, green coffee beans, as your Republican candidate for Senate in Pennsylvania. It is tempting to look at that sort of slate for this year and think something's gone wrong in a uniquely bad way this year. It's never been this bad. No political party has ever had to face candidate problems this bad. But as bad as it is right now, it has been worse, I swear. And I don't know if it's comforting to know that or the opposite, but hear me out. It has been worse. In the great state of North Dakota in the 30s, there was a really black and white, just super obvious rank corruption scheme in the state government. And the state's governor was in on it, and he got brought up on federal corruption charges, and he got convicted. And per an order from the state Supreme Court, that conviction meant that he had to be removed from office as the state's governor. I mean, it's amazing enough that he didn't resign as governor once he was tried and convicted of multiple federal felonies, right? But he was convicted, he didn't resign, and in fact, he refused to leave office at all, even though the court said he had to. Right? Despite the law, he said he was going to stay in office anyway. And he barricaded himself inside the governor's office. He physically barricaded himself in there and surrounded himself with his supporters. He then declared martial law in the state. He then declared that North Dakota was seceding from the Union. He declared that the United States would henceforth lose a state. North Dakota was going to be independent from the federal government. Also, he could stay in power by force. Seriously. Now that situation eventually resolved. Very interesting story there too. But through that whole, insurrection, he never lost the support of his political party. The Republican Party in North Dakota still stood by him, still loved him. And so right after his whole armed insurrection thing, armed insurrection at the State House, barricading himself in office to stay there by force, declaring martial law, trying to break up the United States of America to save himself and stay in power. Just a few years after that, the Republican Party in his state decided that he was the best man in the whole state to be their nominee for the United States Senate.
Can be certain, as long as I'm in the Senate, I will be in there battling for North Dakota and for the United States of America.
I'll be battling for the United States of America, except when I'm battling to get rid of the United States of America so I can stay in power by force. It's just an amazing tale, right? Mostly forgotten, but an amazing tale. And yes, here today in 2022, it is bananas that the Republican Party is nominating the yay for the Unabomber guy, Blake Masters in Arizona, and all of the rest of these guys. But I actually find it comforting. I find it sort of energizing to know that this is not our first go-round with people who you can't believe are anywhere near real power. We have contended with problems like this in the past. When North Dakota's William Langer actually got elected to the U.S. Senate in 1940 from North Dakota, his record was so insane, right? His recent exploits in North Dakota were so radical, so blatantly illegal, that the U.S. Senate actually had to decide after the election whether they were going to allow him to take his seat, given that he had died seceding. He had declared martial law. He had mounted an armed insurrection against the government. Also, the corruption charges that started all of it. But hey, you got to narrow it down. There's a lot to work with here. When he actually won the Senate race in 1940, his Republican would-be colleagues in the United States Senate had to take a vote in the Senate on whether he would be allowed to take his seat. They had to decide whether or not his moral turpitude was too much to allow him to be seated as the senator. So they considered it, and they decided in the end, it's fine. They voted to seat him, and therefore he took his seat as a U.S. senator. And then, in his first term as a U.S. senator, the U.S. Justice Department brought the largest mass sedition indictment in U.S. history against 29 defendants charged with undermining the armed forces of the United States, seeking to overthrow the U.S. government by force, taking support from the Hitler government in Germany to do so. That case, that sedition case itself, was astonishing, and it took a whole bunch of amazing twists and turns. But when that indictment was brought in federal court in Washington, the loudest and most outspoken champion of those defendants, their biggest defender, their loudest ally, was Senator William Langer, the guy from North Dakota who himself had tried to overthrow the government by force, who himself had mounted an armed standoff to defy the rule of law, who was nevertheless supported by his fellow Republicans and brought up to Washington because, hey, what could possibly go wrong? The story of this forgotten Senator William Langer and the accused seditionists he so loudly supported in Washington, that is part of my new podcast that just launched today. It's the story of members of Congress who were implicated in just some terrible stuff, senators and members of the House both. And when the Justice Department tried to act in the courts, when the Justice Department pursued an investigation and brought a criminal prosecution of people who were involved in plots to violently overthrow the government, these members of Congress sprung into action to save themselves and derail the investigation into these threats to throw out the results of a presidential election, to violently overthrow the U.S. government, to have an authoritarian government here instead of a democracy. It all happened. I mean, January 6th, 2021 was really something. And members of Congress who were tied up in it, and the sedition trials that have just started this month for these pro-Trump paramilitary groups who were part of it. It's an amazing thing that we are going through as a country right now, but this is not the first time we have been through something along these lines. And I can tell you, spending all these months working on this project, working on this story, I don't think it's a spoiler to tell you that one of the main takeaways for us, at least one of the main takeaways for me, looking at what happened last time that we were up against something like this, is that the criminal law can't do everything. I mean, we can't ever count on it all being settled in the courtroom. When the country is up against rising authoritarianism and election denialism and extremist ultra-right groups that are willing to use violence against everyone else to get their way, those are crimes, and there definitely is a role for the courts and for the prison system, right? But there's also a really important role for everything else, for a whole of society response. I mean, the criminal justice system isn't bulletproof, but it also doesn't address the nature of those crimes in their totality. And so in order to effectively combat fascism, in order to effectively combat rising authoritarianism, particularly when it comes to trying to undo elections and trying to have power be both achieved and maintained in this country by some means other than democracy, when it comes to threatening force as the way of seizing power here, there is not only room, there is a necessity for a whole of society response, for everybody to do something, for activism, for journalism, for political organizing to keep those folks away from real power,